a few words about other Shakespearean musicals. So, of course, the great success of West Side Story inspired many other musical theatre creators to try their hand at adapting Shakespeare. But for a long, long time, they all backed down and remained with the comedies. So there are quite a lot of titles of Shakespearean inspired musicals, but they're mostly comedies. Some titles that you might want to Google: Your Own Thing from 1968, based on The Twelfth Night; Two Gentlemen of Verona, 1971. This was a rock musical, but also a musical comedy. Another take at the comedy of errors in 1981 called Oh Brother. And even relatively recently, there was a comedy film musical in 2008 called Hamlet 2. Yes, it's a comedy. They are trying to make a sequel to Hamlet. And just a few years ago, in 2015, there was yet another musical comedy based on the works of Shakespeare called Something Rotten. Something Rotten with an exclamation mark. We know this exclamation mark all the way from Oklahoma. So this is a comedy, a kind of slapstick comedy, combining different tropes from Shakespeare, even featuring Shakespeare as a character himself. A famous playwright played in the style of a rock star. It's actually it's quite funny. So the story follows two struggling playwrights, the brothers Bottom, who try to compete with the popularity and fame of their contemporary William Shakespeare. So it's set in kind of imaginary Renaissance England. The musical was quite successful. It even got one Tony, but 10 nominations, so not bad. If you want to see something funny, try to look it up, especially the way that they make fun of theatre as such, Shakespearean theatre and also musical theatre, because there will be a little spoiler. One of the things that the brothers Bottom invent inadvertently with the help of a misguided soothsayer is musical theatre, and they try to make, well, even long centuries before musical as such appears, they try to make the musical of all musicals, featuring a lot of very recognizable tropes. So if you are a fan of the genre, by all means watch it and try to see all the allusions and all the nods in the great musical hit that the brothers Bottom write for the Elizabethan stage. However, one more musical, which is not an obvious thing, but there have been some Shakespearean associations here, and not concerned with the comedy, is Lion King. And the Lion King, of course, based on an animated film, Disney film from 1994, was one of the first attempts, and by far the most successful attempt, to turn Disney cartoons, Disney animated films into stage musicals. We talked about it a little when we talked about the history of the genre, and it has been observed from the beginning by the critics that there are lots of Shakespearean allusions in Lion King, especially to Hamlet. So yes, it's a tragedy, and we have the young prince being faced with the death of his father, and the ghost of the father appears and stirs the young prince to action. It's very Shakespearean, it's very Hamlet inspired, but I don't think anyone has observed it's not only Hamlet, and there is one more play by William Shakespeare that could be an even greater inspiration here in The Lion King, and these are the history plays, especially about Henry IV and Henry V. So the second part of Henry IV, when the future king Henry V is still the Prince of Wales, and he is a rebellious son of the king, and he doesn't want to be a prince. He hangs out with the wrong people, just like the young Simba hangs out with the animals that the royal court of the lions does not approve. It's just like young Henry V hanging out with Falstaff and his friends. Again, after the death of the old king, the young prince has to grow up very quickly, and one of the ways in which he has to prove that he's mature is to take the responsibility to become the king, to make peace with his destiny. If you think about it, Lion King is a very conservative play. It's beautiful visually. The music by Elton John is wonderful, and the theater magic, especially if you have the chance of seeing it live, is absolutely splendid. But the ideology there is very, very conservative. It means accept your obligations. You have nothing to say. You cannot choose your life path. You cannot even choose your life partner. Eventually, Simba marries the female that his family wanted him to. And he becomes the king, of course, because he was born to be the king, and that's what you do when you're a prince. You just have to resign yourself to fate. I don't know whether it's the best ideology to teach, especially to young children, but it's definitely Shakespearean. So next week we'll talk about the other holy book, namely the Bible, and religion as such as the theme in the musical theatre. So the two musicals I would like you to see in any version are Fiddler on the Roof and Jesus Christ Superstar. Especially Jesus Christ Superstar. There are several versions in circulation. You can see the old film, which is very good. You can see one of the recorded theatre productions. There is a relatively recent one with Tim Minchin in the role of Judas. If you don't know Tim Minchin, you will next week. So these two musicals will mostly focus on, and I would like you to think perhaps about some other titles of musicals inspired by different religions, not necessarily Christianity, but different religions. If you want a third very good one, watch the Book of Mormon. Again, it's not about typical religion, but it's very, very interesting, and it's a good comedy. So that's what we'll do next week. Thank you. Hello. So now it's November. I've just watched through the parts we recorded in March, and I generally stand by everything I said about Shakespeare and Kiss Me Kate and West Side Story and the other shows, and I was thinking about what to add so you have something new this semester, and I thought that perhaps it's a good moment to point out to you that we choose some specific aspect, thematic aspect connected with the musical theatre each week now, but it doesn't mean that your analysis must be limited to these chosen elements. So for example, of course, we could talk about perhaps some more musicals inspired by Shakespeare, or including some elements of Shakespeare's plays and motifs used by Shakespeare. But just as well, you can go away from the Shakespearean theme altogether and read those musicals, analyze those musicals for some other elements. And I thought, well, West Side Story is a great play about immigrants, and especially recently this has become a big topic in the musical theatre. You may recall we talked about Hamilton already, and the theme of immigrants, of course, is very important here. But it's been part of the American interest, part of the legacy of the multicultural and multi-ethnic society that America has been, and especially American musicals have a lot of this in common. The musicals from the period before West Side Story, so the titles like Finian's Rainbow, for example, from 1947, which deals with the Irish influence in America, and also Fiddler on the Roof from 1964, one of the musicals that we are going to discuss next week. It ends, yes, spoiler alert, with the family and neighbors of Tevye deciding to immigrate to America. So they will add to this great melting pot of nations and cultures that will fuel American culture, including the musical theater. Before Hamilton, there were other musicals, very notably a previous show by Lin-Manuel Miranda called In the Heights, which premiered in 2005, and which clearly focuses on the emigration to America in recent decades from the Spanish-speaking countries. So we have neighbors in one area of New York, coming from Puerto Rico and Cuba and other, let's say, Latino places. So it would be a very interesting topic to see how the immigrants from these regions were presented in West Side Story, and how half a century later they were presented in The Heights. So absolutely, if you liked Hamilton, you may want to check out this one. And one more title of a less known musical, but by very famous and very successful creative team, Benny Andersson and Björn Ulvaeus from ABBA, the composer and lyricist who are responsible for the great success of the pop group ABBA. They were also performers who made their name writing musicals later on. You may be familiar with the titles of Chess and Mamma Mia, of course. Using the previous materials they made for ABBA, but they also, in the late 90s, so it starts in the year 1995, but it gains international recognition in the first years of the 21st century with the English translation, because they started it in Swedish. They wrote a musical together set in the 19th century, based on a cycle of novels from Swedish literature about the Swedish immigrants to America. It's called Kristina, or Kristina from Duvemala, which apparently is the name of some village in Sweden. And this is an interesting musical, although I would say that the main character is one of the characters that really irritate me in musical theater. But it's always interesting to find a character like that, because, well, she's a martyr. Look it up, Christina from Duvemåla, or Christina the musical. She's a martyr to marital sex. And she keeps having children, even though everybody, including the doctor and her own husband, tells her she shouldn't have so many of them because it will kill her in the end. And surprise, surprise, she dies in childbirth in the end. There is some good music. There are some interesting subjects concerning the lives of the immigrants from what wouldn't really be the obvious background, like, let's say, the Jews from the former Russian Empire, or people from the Spanish-speaking countries. But here we have 19th century Sweden and a group of poor farmers who decide to go to America to look for better life, but they encounter American Indians, Native Americans, who feel that their land is not really empty and free for the taking. So we have something that is really a topic in the musical theater. So the conflict, not as you would have in Oklahoma, between two different groups of American immigrants, but the native inhabitants of the land as well. So it's just to indicate to you that if you would like to explore some other subjects of the chosen titles, or some similar shows dealing with those subjects from a different perspective, absolutely go ahead. This could be an interesting topic for your final essay. So as I said, in March next time we'll talk about religion. Please watch Fiddler on the Roof and Jesus Christ Superstar, any version. See you next week.